So talk me through how you got started with Tring Corinthians in 2024. How did that job kind of come to you?
It was a bit of an interesting story, actually. I'd been coaching at Watford in the doing the developments pathway stuff, and I decided that I wanted to make that step into management. And I literally just tweeted to say, thinking about going into management. If there's any teams looking, let me know, sort of thing. And it was just literally a shot in the dark. And within 10 minutes, I had a call from Andrew at Tring, or a message from Andrew at Tring, and then we had a call quickly. And yeah, it was just perfect timing. He'd literally pretty much at the same time as I'd posted, he'd posted saying we're looking for a reserve manager. So I went and met obviously Martin and Andrew, who were the joint managers, and Gary, who was the chairman. And yeah, it was a really nice place for me to take that first step into management.
Did they make it quite a straightforward process for you? Obviously, calling you 10 minutes after putting out a tweet, did they make it relatively straightforward?
Well, I mean, obviously, Gary, who's sadly no longer with us, he's basically Mr. Tring Corinthians. He'd been the chairman for many, many years, and he knew football in that area, in that location, and that level inside out, basically. And Martin and Andrew had both been at the club a couple of seasons, and so it was a very stable club. Everything was there ready to step into, basically. So yeah, it definitely made it easy, and the fact that everyone at the club, from Stephen, who's the chairman, all the way down, are just good people. So yeah, it was a very easy place to join and get involved.
What were you kind of told about the pathway at Tring Corinthians?
I knew that so Tring Corinthians, I'm not sure everyone knows this, is part of a group of clubs within Tring. So Tring Corinthians is the adult pathway, and then Tring Tornadoes are the youth setup. So I knew that there was a link there. During that season, working with Stephen and Chris Jurasek, who were doing the under-18s, we would look to get those involved. So I knew that there was a pathway there. There were obviously existing players in the under-23s, and Gary, the chairman, so my target for the season when I came in was to get promoted. So it was quite a big target for a first season in management, but quite early it was obvious that we had a good group of players, and if we could work well as a team, then we'd have a successful season. So yeah, but Tring Corinthians got big plans. They've been building pitches. They've got an Astro incoming. It's a growing football club. So yeah, there's a good future there.
What did you expect from the level of football then? Obviously, going into the Hearts County League, did you kind of have a rough idea of what you were looking at ability-wise?
I mean, I knew that it was obviously, I think it was Division 4 or 5. I can't remember. I think it might be 5. It was lower down in the Hearts County. It would be a mix of young players. There'd be older players, experienced players, and it would probably be quite physical. So I think, obviously every reserve team is different, but in general, you're looking to give players experience, to get them as much match experience as possible, and prepare them for a first team. So there were players at the club that had featured for the first team in a few games here and there, and those players were integral to our first season at Tring. And every squad develops over the season. I'm pretty sure if I looked at the first team that I put out on week 1 versus the team that finished the season, there'd probably be a few different players, but there'd be a core of lads that were there through the season that helped us to be successful.
Yeah, what was the start? Obviously, you say it was going to be quite a physical division. You knew that going into it. Did you try and maybe adapt your style of play around that at all, or did you have quite a fixed way of playing that you wanted to use no matter the circumstance?
Um, I think there's every team lots of people talk about styles and philosophies and all those things, but I think you have to try and play a style of football that suits where you are at. And if we're in Division 5 in the Hearts County, we're probably not playing on the smoothest pitches. So sometimes we'd have to adjust a little bit for weather and conditions and things like that. But in general, we were trying to get the ball down and play where we could. But you have to play to your players' strengths as well. So sometimes you might have a stronger player up front. We can play hold up. Sometimes we might have a fast player up front. We can play in behind. And I think if you can get your players to be adaptable like that and can learn to win in multiple ways, then you've got a more well-rounded player anyway, rather than just having one distinct style of play, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Did you find it hard to maybe recruit players at that level as well? Obviously, it's a very difficult kind of league to try and keep players in with the lower down county leagues. Players are moving all the time. Did you find it hard to recruit as well?
I was really fortunate in that, I say Andrew and Martin in the first team had been established for a while, so they had a good network and they were helpful in helping to get players to come into the team. I had a few contacts myself, so I'd get people that would come in, and Chris Jurasek, who I mentioned earlier, who was working with the under-18s, is a well-known name around the local league scene. He knows a lot of players, he watches a lot of football, and he was very helpful as well in terms of recommending players here and there. So look, I think every single football player wants to play as high as they can, but it's for some players they just need experience, and trying to be a step 4 footballer when it's your first season of football and maybe you need to play a bit lower is probably the right thing. All of those conversations have to be had with players. Some of them listen and some of them don't, and eventually everyone finds the right level. It just depends how long it takes them to work it out.
Yeah. Did you have any kind of personal, obviously you said earlier, first season in management, what were your personal targets going into it, from your own personal development point of view?
I would say, I think, so I'd been coaching, I'd been like an assistant coach at Coney Heath. I'd been assistant coach at FC Romania and Brisbane Rangers. So I'd been around sort of step 5 teams as a coach. So I think I don't really set myself targets to say, I want to achieve this or whatever, but I'm, as a coach, I'm always looking to learn and develop. And I think the step into management for me was about understanding more player management and those player relationships and how to motivate people, that maybe as a coach you don't always get those opportunities to have those discussions and deal with people in that way. So it was probably more that area of development for me as a manager rather than a personal target or something like that.
Yeah. So obviously you had a really successful first season in management, coming second in that division and getting promoted. Where do you, obviously it's kind of a almost silly thing to say in a way, but where do you think you could have improved on certain things throughout that season?
Well, I mean, that season we were the top scorers. We conceded the least, but we still finished second. So there's games that I look back on and really think we should have won that game. But sometimes there are games of football where you feel like you've done everything right and somehow you haven't put the ball in the net, or somehow you've conceded a silly goal, and ultimately, as a team you make mistakes and you try and improve things. But there was, for me, the group of players that we had in the reserves at Corries was, it was a great spirit across the club, involvement with the first team, and the boys all knew each other and there was friendship groups across them. So it was a very strong team spirit. And I think it was just getting those guys to play with confidence and believe in themselves. And if I look back at that season, I think that there are kids that have gone and played higher and pushed on from that season. So there's some really good stories of players that came in and experienced things. Would I change anything about that season? Maybe the £100 it cost me in a taxi on the way home after celebrating the getting promoted, but that's probably it.
Do you think that Tring team would have been equally as successful two or three divisions above in the Hearts County League, or maybe even at Step 7?
I don't think that team would have been ready to go into Step 7 straight away. There were definitely players in that team that were capable, but not the whole. If we'd taken that whole squad and tried to play Step 7, then we would have. I'm not saying we wouldn't have won games, but we would have had a much more difficult season. There were players that I think, like, we had Kenzo Kanate, who played 3 games for me. Then he went and played for the first team, and now he's at Aylesbury Vale. I think he was Player of the Year or Manager's Player of the Year for Aylesbury Vale this year. So that can be the progression. He was willing to come and play for me to get some experience. It was very obvious that he was a standout player for us. He quickly made it into the first team, and by the end of the season, he progressed to Step 5. So, from playing Hearts Division 5 at the beginning of one season, he was a Step 5 player the next season. So, the progress, can be made at varying levels of success, and everyone's developing at different rates and different times. I think, to answer your question, we definitely weren't a Step 7 football team, but there were definitely players there that were capable of playing higher.
Yeah. So, obviously, at the end of that season, you moved over to Colney Heath.
Yep.
Did you know that was going to happen before kind of the final games of the season, or was that a very kind of jump out of nowhere move?
I didn't have prior knowledge of it in terms of knowing months before or anything. So the way it came about was the first team manager at Coney Heath was no longer the first team manager. So the reserve managers, who were Paul Small and Paul O'Hare, stepped up to do the first team, as is quite often the way. Our season had pretty much already finished. I think we had maybe one game left. The reserves at Coney Heath still had a few games to play. So they reached out and said, would I be interested? And we had a conversation, and it just went from there. It was a good conversation. It was obviously for me, going from Tring reserves to Coney reserves was a step up. So I was keen to do it. That's absolutely no disrespect to Corrie's. It was a brilliant club that I really enjoyed being a part of. Still speak to people there. But it was, like I say, for me, it was Coney Heath's pretty much my local club. So it was a kind of easy decision to make, really.
Yeah. So obviously, coming into Coney Heath, did Tring make it an easy kind of exit for you, or did they try and keep you a little bit, or was there any kind of talk show with them, or did they almost understand that obviously Coney Heath reserves step up for you personally?
I said Gary is, who was the chairman at the time, was a very, very experienced guy. He'd had a lot of managers and he'd lost managers, so he understood the game. He understood how these things work, and if you have successful managers, that people will come in for them. He obviously, he spoke to me. I remember having a conversation with him, and he said, if you do decide to go, I've got people lined up to take over. He was that guy. He knew enough people. He knew that he already had backup plans in place. I had a good relationship with Andrew and Martin. And we did talk about how we could potentially move forward, but it just made sense for me as with that step up and with it being my local team, and I say at the time my son's team had actually folded as well, so he was going to Coney Heath as well. So it just made a lot of sense from a personal point of view as well, really.
Yeah. So what were your kind of first few days like within Coney Heath? Did you notice any kind of main attitude differences in how they take football necessarily between Tring and Coney?
Well, because of the situation in terms of the reserves at Coney Heath season wasn't finished, but the reserve managers were managing the first team. There was kind of a bit of a crossover period. So I sort of shadowed, I guess would be one of a good description. I went to a couple of matches, and I was fortunate to be able to sort of see the players in action, to see the way they were being coached, to see what the key messages were to those players, how they operate, and how things were being done. So from a manager coming in, it was quite a useful exercise for me to go to those games and be able to see how things were done. In terms of an attitude difference between Tring and Coney, honestly, I think everyone wants to win football matches, and both clubs are exactly the same in that regard. I wouldn't say honestly, I wouldn't say there's any attitude difference. No, obviously they're playing at different steps, but everyone's just doing their best to win football matches, really.
Yeah. Did you have with that? Was there any expectations laid out by Coney Heath so your first full season, like you had kind of a few games where you shadowed off season, first full season? What were the expectations for you? What did they want you to achieve with that squad?
So the sort of expectations, targets were, I think that what was actually said was, there's no hard target as such, but it was can we win more games than we lose, and can we develop players into the first team? So if we can, have solid success and get players, that maybe at the beginning of the season are not on the first team radar that are in that group by the end of the season, then we'd consider that progress. So that was the general aim.
Yeah. So did you notice there was any kind of major pathway difference between the two clubs as well? Did you see maybe more players from Tring, for instance, are making it to the first team, or more players from Coney are making it to the first team? Was there?
It's not so much of a difference in terms of numbers of players making the team, but Coney Heath has a really good reputation locally for youth football. If you compared the age groups going up through the Tring teams and the Coney Heath teams are playing at a much higher standard in their youth football. So when it comes to under 18s and under 23s, their players are probably naturally more ready for the levels that they're playing at. In terms of pathway, I would just say that not necessarily the pool of players being necessarily bigger, but there were probably more players that were ready to make a step up, and they were ambitious to do that and pushing to be up. That's probably, I'd say, the difference between the pathways.
Yeah. So obviously you had a majorly successful season. Talk me through kind of the timeline of that season. How did it start? Did you have any moments where you not almost knew something was going to happen, but you could kind of feel something coming? Or walk me through the timeline.
I say, because our target, we weren't targeting winning a league or anything like that. We would, I hate losing, right? So we're going out to win every game, but it became, I think probably after sort of 4 or 5 games, we started looking at the table and looking at our results and thinking, actually, we've got a really good chance here. The players had all bought into the environment we were creating. We worked as closely as we could with the first team to try and give players exposure, and that was conversation with the first team management about how we get people that time. And there were players that were standouts in the under 18s that were pushing to push into the 23s. So there were players, a bit like we said earlier, maybe weren't on on your radar in pre-season that by even September, October, you're thinking we really need to get these players involved. I think there was one key moment where I knew I already knew they were a great bunch of kids and great players, but for me there was we played, I can't remember which cup it was. We played one of the cups we played in. We were playing Corinthian casuals away, and we had an unfortunate sending off for 2 yellows, 2 very never yellows really, and we were I think 1-0 down at half time, and it was the cup. The cup had it was like the old Champions League style, so you played a little mini league, and then you went into knockouts. And at half time, I went in and I said, "Look, we're 1-0 down. We're down to 10 men. I think we can get a draw out of this game. You know, we can definitely score goals. Made good chances. Haven't taken them. You know, I think we should go for it." And via some expletives, my players made it clear that they didn't believe that was good enough, and they wanted to go and win the game. So I said, "Okay, if you think you can go and win it, let's go for it. Why not?" And we scored 4 goals in the second half and won 4-1. So that showed me their mentality and their sort of desire to win. So yeah, that was, I think at that point, you kind of realise that, you know, they have, that group had something special when they're all playing well. You know, at that suburban league level, they were a very strong team. So yeah, that was probably the biggest sort of memorable moment for me, aside from obviously winning the trophies and all the good moments like that. But that was definitely something I remember.
Yeah. Was there any kind of specific players you would look to for special moments like that?
This is like, it's going to sound a little bit cheesy, I guess, but like genuinely, everyone had special moments. We had, I mean, like, everyone talks about goals. We had Harley, who scored, I can't remember the numbers. I think he scored 22 goals in 16 games or something like that. Way more. He scored more than a goal a game. Our goalkeeper was tremendous, Jacob Lemon. Fullbacks were brilliant, could get forward and go back, Jacob and Luca. We had Cairo and Finn at centre backs, both the Finns. Freddie and Harry in the middle, incredible. We had David and Miles playing the wings and 10. We had Kobe Dubry, scored loads of goals. We were blessed that I've probably now upset 4 people who I haven't named yet, but genuinely we scored some fantastic goals. Actually, the first game of the season, we played Berkhamsted, who were probably our biggest challenge in the season. They were a very good team, and we were losing 1-0. We scored a penalty in the 89th minute, and then Francis scored a 30-yard volley in off the bar in about the 92nd minute. And again, you talk about moments, like that's a sort of moment where you realise, like, we've got a special group of players that can pull moments like that out of the hat. So there were players that, like I say, Jack Wingate, who, you know, worked so hard all through the season, probably wasn't starting much at the beginning, was frustrated in some of those semi-finals, played out of his skin. Just lots and lots of good moments for people. I say, I hope that all those players look back at that season. Obviously, everyone looks at the trophies and success, but there was lots of good progress for those players as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when that season ended at Colne Heath, did you plan? Did a lot of those players already then have first team experience coming into now this season that's coming?
Colne Heath, as I said to you before, is a club that relies heavily on its pathway, and so, you know, I'm not going to sit here and claim credit for for players making first team appearances, because for two reasons. One, some of them had played first team football before I was at the club. They'd had experience of that over a year or two even. Some of them might have played 1 game 2 years ago, 3 games last year, 10 games this year. So that process was already happening with some of those players. What I think we did well was the environment we had in the reserves, and the way we were playing football and the way we approached games meant that if there were players that were in the first team that maybe weren't being selected, they were happy to drop into the reserves and play, because it was a good place to play football. So we were fortunate to have good fluidity between the teams. There were players that towards the end of the season, I think I mentioned Kobe, he's stepped up into the first. I think he played the last 6 or 7 games for the first team after starting the season in the under-18s. So there was movement between the squads, as always happens. But yeah, it's ultimately a club like Coney Heath doesn't have the biggest budget, and it's heavily reliant on having a strong pathway. And there's lots and lots of good youth teams coming through. So Musa, under-18s, he was the under-16s manager. He's got a great team. Andrew behind him, Brad in the year behind him. So the next 3-4 seasons, they've got great teams coming through still. So they'll still have a great pathway.
Yeah. So other than obviously the sheer quality, so that's knocking on my door. So obviously other than the sheer quality of the Suburban League being different to the Hearts League, where else did you find key differences, maybe in like the playing styles teams would try and implement as well?
I would say there's definitely, if you were to watch our games back, there's a lot of teams that want to play out from the back and impose their style of football. And if you're comparing that to a Hearts senior team, the Hearts senior would probably be a bit more direct and a bit more physical. It doesn't mean that those suburban games are easy, and there were certainly some physical moments and tough challenges and all that stuff. But yeah, as a general rule, I'd say, those development sides are there to try and teach everyone, good fundamentals, like playing out from the back and all the pressing and all the things that teams want to show that they can do. And then, the Hearts senior, like I say, maybe a bit more physical.
Yeah. Do you think as well, obviously with the Suburban League almost having a little bit of prestige around it, it made it a lot easier for you to keep, recruit and kind of keep players wrapped up in it all a little bit, whereas if you had the same success at Hearts Senior League, for instance, you maybe would find it a little bit harder to keep the players around. But obviously Suburban League, everyone looks at the Suburban League from the outside as the kind of perfect development system for younger players in the area. Would you agree?
So I believe that the Suburban League is a really good standard for developing football players and football teams. I think you can definitely develop young players in that league. Every manager is going to have different opinions on that about what they want out of a reserve team. I think even this season we've seen teams that step forward folding their reserve setups because they can't afford them or they don't feel they're getting enough value out of them. So everyone has probably been a question for the age of time of how valuable a reserve setup is. But in my opinion, at Coney Heath, it's incredibly important. I think to jump from, to look at, being a first year under 18, so you're 16 or 17 years old, trying to jump straight into step 5 football, if you're asked to step up, is a big jump. So having that opportunity to play midweek football in your under 18s, get some exposure in the Suburban League, and then hopefully, like I say, that's a bridge between your under 18s and your first team. And I think it was really good preparation for those guys. So there's lots of players that are definitely ready to play step 6, step 5 where as high as they want to push themselves, really.
Yeah. So going back to kind of success in cup finals,
Yeah.
your final 5 games of that season, you had kind of, I think, had 4 cup games and 1 league fixture, if I remember correctly. Walk me through the kind of how that would look. Did your match day routine change? Did your training kind of change based around how many cup games you were playing in close capacity?
So the league actually confirming that we'd won the league. It was, I'm not sure what the right word is, but we weren't expecting to win the league on the day we did. The team, I think there was a team drew that we were expecting to win, so we kind of won the league when we weren't really expecting it. So we played Hayes and Yedding knowing we'd already won the league, and we don't want to make excuses. Hayes and Yedding absolutely deserved to win that game 100%, but we'd already won the league and we were missing a couple of players, and it was a bit of a flat game overall. But like you say, having 2 semi-finals and 2 finals as your last 4 games is absolutely brilliant for motivation in terms of getting people motivated, keeping them engaged, and having something to play for. There was obviously adjustments to training because some of the games were midweek. But aside from that, everyone was just focused on trying to have as much success as possible. And we knew we had St Albans in one semi-final and Harrow Borough in the other, who were both teams from the division above. We knew they'd be difficult. But yeah, we managed to work our way through those difficult fixtures and came out on top.
Yeah. So obviously stepping away from Colney Heath, again, kind of similar question to the one I have for Tring. Was this a known quantity that you were going to leave at the end of the season, or was it kind of another situation where Stopfold asked the question and step up for you? Or
no, it was a bit of a different situation there. So I thought I would carry on with Coney Heath. They decided they wanted to go in a different direction, and that's their prerogative. It's their football club. That's their decision. I guess look, if a team removes the manager that's won a few trophies, everyone's going to talk about it, and I was, I guess, the beneficiary of that in terms of lots of people, were talking about it, and probably the reason why you've asked me to come on here, because I don't think anyone even knew I existed before that. So the fact that that decision was made, although it was closing a door in one regard, it actually opened lots of doors, and I was really grateful to all of the clubs that reached out to me. I spoke to lots of clubs in that next sort of 7 to 10 days. I spoke to 7 or 8 clubs, I think, but once I met Rob and Eddie, so Chairman Rob at Stopfold and Eddie's first team manager, I think between meeting them and joining, I think it was a day or 2, I think. So yeah, it was, Stopfold is obviously a Step 4 team in their first team. Got not a brand new stadium, but probably one of the newest stadiums in the area. Great setup, and it's you were talking about earlier about Suburban League being the gold standard for sort of development football, but this is a reserve team that's on the football pyramid. It's at Step 6, and so it was a logical, I guess, again, another progression for me, another challenge for me. So yeah, it's really grateful, I say, to everyone that I spoke to, but yeah, really enjoyed the conversation with Rob and Eddie, and yeah, it's been going well so far. Enjoying it.
yeah, what made you interested in Stopfold that almost separated them from the other clubs you'd spoken to in particular?
I mean, I have to say, Stopfold reserves, obviously, I think Leighton reserves are also in that division. You can't go higher than Step 6 with the reserve side. So, you could look at that as a negative in terms of, well, you can't really go any higher. What are you going to achieve? The previous manager, John Little, I don't know him particularly well, but he's cultivated a brilliant side that he's progressed all the way up to that level. And a lot of those guys are pushing up to step 5 and step 4 even in some cases. So, I wish him and them all the best for their future. They've been a massive part of Stotfold. So, the challenge for me is, can I maintain even the success that they've had? Can we try and replicate, or can we get close to what they achieved, with pretty much a clean slate? It's pretty much, there's maybe 1 or 2 players that have retained, but most people, it's pretty much a brand new team. So our challenge is attracting new players and recruiting new players, and basically building a team that can compete at that level.
Yeah. So obviously you mentioned there about a lot of players leaving with the management and things like that. And I saw obviously on Twitter that there was kind of open trials.
Yeah.
How integral is that now, the open trials, to maybe the success you're going to have in the season? Obviously bringing in, that gives you a large pool of local players, because if you're a step 7 player, for instance, and you hear Stotfold are looking for players, your ears prick up. Do you think that's giving you a wide enough pool to look at for who you can bring in, who's quality enough to play at step 6?
I was impressed with the level of players that we attracted to the trial, and I think we had to close it after 3 days. We had 50 players, so there were lots of people that attended, lots of people that showed what they can do. You talked before about what attracts people to clubs, but if you're a young player looking at coming to Stotfold Reserves, that there's a chance to play regular step 6 football and the chance to potentially push into a first team at step 4. So, it's an attractive proposition. Like I say, there's great facilities at the club, great stadium, great pitch. Clubhouse has cold beer in it. There's lots of good things. So, I think it's a good place for young people to come, and again, get experience of football, get experience of that level, and progress in their journey.
Yeah. Do you also feel that a successful reserve team could be directly responsible for a successful first team? Because I know a lot of teams, like you said about Colney Heath, do rely on their pathways, whereas you look at some teams that, I'm not going to cast judgment on them in particular, but certain teams don't care so much about a pathway. So
I think sometimes teams can be victims of their own success. I had a good conversation with Andrew at Cheshunt Development. I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning his name, but they are in step 7, but their first team is step 3, and so that's a really big jump for players to make that transition between the two teams. So Stotfold Reserves, step 6 to step 4, that's a manageable step for players moving between a reserve and a first team. So, I think absolutely. I just don't think. I think if you want to be a successful football club, you've got to build a community and you've got to have people engage with your club, and that means if you can offer as much football to local people as possible, if you can provide reserves and under 18s and youth football as well as your first team offering, then that gives you a good chance of building that community and entertaining them, engaging them, and generally having more success.
Yeah. So obviously it's a new league to you, kind of as a manager. Are there any grounds or teams you're particularly looking forward to playing against, or maybe not say fearing, but feeling are going to be a tough gig for you?
I'll hold my hands up and say I don't know masses about all the teams. I saw the Spartan Talk X feed, Twitter feed, whatever it's called, were asking people for their sort of predictions for the divisions, and a lot of people were seemed to be tipping Amptil, and I think East and Soken were the two in our division that everyone seemed to be tipping. So look, I have no doubt that a lot for a lot. I know for a lot of young players, if we just talked about the attraction of joining a club like Stotfold, but for some players, if they have a choice to be in a first team at Step 6 or a reserve team at Step 6, some people will choose that first team because it's a first team and they're a first team player. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's probably me being slightly biased as a reserve team manager. But some people make that decision. So, we're going to be up against a lot of experienced sides, well-established teams, and going back to what we talked about earlier with Tring, we're going to have to be, as a team, we're going to have to be adaptable and learn how to win, do what it takes to win, right? Whether that's to battle hard, whether that's to play long or play short, whatever we need to do, we're going to try and get all those tools in the toolbox for the players.
Yeah. So with this question, you can be as diplomatic as you want to be. I know it's kind of a taboo subject in especially kind of step 6, step 5 football. Does a reserve team have a budget?
My reserve team doesn't. I don't know if other reserve teams do. I'd be very surprised if many reserve teams have a budget. I mean, generally, most grassroots or lower teams lower down the pyramid don't have huge budgets, and if they do, they would probably use it for their first team, and rightly so. I think if you're looking at if there's a player that wants to play Step 6 and their motivation is money, then I think their head's in the wrong place. I think honestly, most young players, I would hope, are looking to progress in their football journey, push on, improve to whatever level they can be. None of the coaches get paid. I think, if money's your main motivation as a player, then there's probably something not right.
Yeah. So to kind of round this all off, is there anything you would like to personally promote yourself or promote for the club, or anyone you want to give credit to or shout outs to at all?
I think I've given shout outs to everyone that's been involved along the way. Obviously, coming to Stotfold, been really grateful with Eddie and Dan, Meza, Joe, Louis, and Carl. The coaches in the first team have all been really welcoming, really engaging. We've had a good few sessions working together, and I can see that it's going to be a good season working together. So I'm looking forward to carrying that on. Tony Kavanagh, who was with us at Coney Heath, he's joined as well, and so looking forward to having his experience to lean upon. I think at Coney Heath we had my under-18s manager was Ian, who I worked with. He was a fantastic guy. Can't do enough to help. So really grateful for all the help I had from him. Team is only as good as its players. I'm very new in management, so 2 seasons. Maybe haven't worked with loads of players, but I'm really grateful to all the players that have played for me, and everyone turns up, works hard, does their best, and then success will come off the back of that.
Perfect, mate. Appreciate you coming on today.
No problems. Thanks very much for having me.
That's all right, mate. Take care and good luck for the new season.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it, man.
Bye.